Adrianna Lucero, who was a young mother of 3 children. One of them children was 23-month-old Alejandro, who was also known as Alex. She also had twins, whose names are to be redacted. Now, Adriana's boyfriend was Sergio Martinez Gonzalez. He was the father of the twins, but he was not the father of Alex. You see, Adrianna and Mr. Martinez's relationship was complicated. She lived with her mother, but Mr. Martinez would frequently visit, and always on the weekends. Sometimes Adrianna and the children would visit Mr. Martinez in his basement room, in a home where he lived with 2 other women. You see, Mr. Martinez had a wife and children in Mexico and was living in the United States illegally, and Alex's biological father had already been deported to Mexico. Jesus, what the hell? Mr. Martinez would regularly send money to his family in Mexico and call them on his cell phone, which was a frequent point of contention between Adrianna and Mr. Martinez. Their relationship was further complicated by Adriana's age. You see, she was only 17 years old and regularly took her children to a childcare program at her high school where she was on track to graduate. Wow, children in high school. Jesus. Now, the 2 parties, Adrianna and Mr. Martinez, provided differing accounts of their relationship with Alex, but Adrianna had instructed Mr. Martinez to keep his distance from Alex. Accordingly, Mr. Martinez refused to discipline Alex, and he maintained that he never took care of Alex. You see, at one point in their relationship, Adrianna planned to take her children on a school field trip to the zoo. Though Mr. Martinez was supposed to take them to the bus, he arrived late and then drove them himself. After Mr. Martinez picked them up later that day, Adrianna and he got into a fight, which was sparked by the fact that Adrianna had received text messages from a male friend. After Adrianna pounded on Mr. Martinez's car, he abused her in the leg and she broke his windshield. Jesus. Mr. Martinez was ultimately convicted of domestic assault for the altercation, but Adrianna attempted to protect Mr. Martinez after he told her that he could be deported. You see, Adrianna had lost her temper on previous occasions as well, when she had broken a phone and a computer screen. Now, about a week before his death, Alex began to have problems walking. Adrianna took him to a clinic, but the doctor could not identify the cause. She maintained that Alex was in her and her mother's care when he began to exhibit symptoms. But after Alex's death, Adrianna was pressed by detectives about the prior injury and began to claim that Mr. Martinez was abusive to Alex. She also claimed that Alex's injuries arose after a fishing trip with Mr. Martinez that had taken place 2 or 3 days before Alex had trouble walking, because Alex's difficulty with walking did not begin until several days after the fishing trip when Mr. Martinez was not present. A detective noted that her timeline of events did not make sense. Now, on August 24, 2008, Adrianna brought Alex and one of the twins to visit Mr. Martinez in his house. The other twin was in hospital due to recurring seizures, and they had spent the day visiting with him. They ate dinner and began to watch a horror movie as Alex slept beside them on the bed and the twins slept in a car seat next to the bed. Now, in the course of the evening, the two began to fight after Adrianna picked up Mr. Martinez's phone and saw that Mr. Martinez had called his family in Mexico, and then at some point Alex began to fuss. And you have to understand what's going on here. The reason why it's a problem that Martinez called back home, because of course he has a wife and Adrianna does not want him talking to his wife, which is a bit dumb. Why? Well, if you know he's married, why the hell are you with him, you muppet? Alex was then taken into the next room to get some jello, where he sustained the fatal injury and began to exhibit seizure-like symptoms. Adrianna and Mr. Martinez called 911 and attempted to administer CPR, but Alex was declared dead soon thereafter. Although both Adrianna and Martinez's accounts of what transpired that evening are mostly the same, they each blamed the other for taking Alex out of the room to get the jello and for causing the fatal injury. But Adrianna did not always blame Martinez. In fact, the hours following Alex's death, she told 8 different people, including 2 police officers and the 911 operator, that she was the one who took Alex to get Jello. And she told detectives the following day the same story, that she and not Martinez had taken Alex to get the Jello. Once the detectives informed her the true nature of Alex's spinal injuries and that they were not the result of a seizure, Adrianna changed her story to indicate that it was instead Martinez who had taken Alex to get the Jello. She told detectives that she had lied to keep Martinez from being questioned by officials because he might be deported. Adrianna explained that she initially thought that Alex had an unexplained seizure like her other son, but then she knew the real cause of Alex's death. She thought that Martinez must have been responsible for it. Now at the trial, Adrianna and Martinez blamed each other for inflicting Alex's fatal injury. The state medical examiner said Alex appeared to have been abused before. Alex had bruises and marks on his face. He had rib fractures that were healing and an old back injury that could have been caused by the same method of abuse that killed him. Now, an autopsy was done. The state medical examiner concluded that Alex suffered a fatal injury to his spinal cord after his back was apparently bent in an abnormal way. The mechanism of the spinal fracture was not likely from a stomp or a abuse to the child's back, but was more likely a severe bending force which bent Alex's lumbar spine backward. Wow. And that would have taken some time to inflict, during which Alex would have been screaming the entire time. Now, authorities charged Adrianna as an adult in the 3rd District Court with first-degree felony murder in the death of her son. Martinez was arrested for obstruction and was booked on an immigration hold before receiving an additional charge. The twins were removed from their care and placed in a foster home. When Adrianna went to trial, it only took a jury 3.5 hours to find her guilty of murdering her toddler son by snapping his spine. Judge Vernice Treese imposed a sentence of 15 years to life for the first-degree murder of Alex, and also sentenced Adrianna to 15 years to life for second-degree felony child abuse. The judge ordered that the sentences run concurrently. There were no clear answers as to why Adrianna murdered Alex, but there are some speculations. You see, prosecutors insisted Adrianna was a stressed-out single mother with 3 children by the time she was 17, who coldly got rid of the dispensable child in her life. The prosecution theorized that the toddler was wrecking Adrianna's chances to fulfill her version of the American dream, which included a family life with Martinez as well as a college degree and a shot at gaining financial wealth. They noted that Adrianna had a fiery temper and broke things when in a rage. Prosecutors also told the jury that Adrianna repeatedly lied about what happened to Alex. She lied to the police, the paramedics, hospital workers, her sister, and her mother. Defense attorneys, however, painted Adrianna as a vulnerable young woman who was physically abused by her lover and who lied to police only to protect him from being deported to Mexico. Defense attorneys maintained that Mr. Martinez was the person who wanted Alex out of the way and that he was the person with the physical strength to break Alex's spine. But Mr. Martinez's charges were dismissed. Now, in 2023, Adrianna was up for parole. So I went to the Utah Corrections website and it seems she was indeed granted parole because I don't find her on the correction site. So, do you agree with this decision? Either way, I feel like at the age of 17, her being in high school, she could not handle 3 children. And yes, this idea that her life was now sacrificed in a sense and she had to take care of her children, which is a very individualistic way to look at it, but I do think she just wanted them out of the way. And also Mr. Martinez being married and all that stuff clearly did not help. At the age of 17, she had no idea how to handle any of this. Now I'm going to tell you the story of Jeanette Maples. This story is insane. Brace yourself. Now in 1994, Angela Mcanulty gave birth to her daughter Jeanette in California. Approximately 1 year later, Angela lost custody of Jeanette due to drug use, neglect, and physical abuse. Several years later, Angela gave birth to another daughter and regained custody of Jeanette. Angela then met and married Richard, giving birth to their son shortly thereafter. Richard became Jeanette's stepfather. Now in early 2006, the family moved to a house in Robin Avenue in Eugene, Oregon, and Jeanette enrolled in middle school. Jeanette's classmates and teachers soon noticed that Jeanette appeared skinny and was always hungry. While at school, Jeanette's friends shared food with her, and she obtained food from lunch aides. Around that time, Jeanette wrote a letter to a school official explaining that she was denied food at home. She was forced to eat chili peppers and forced to sit on her knees for long periods of time for punishment. School officials alerted the Department of Human Services, which opened an investigation into the allegations. A DHS caseworker interviewed and conducted a home visit at the time. However, after gathering conflicting statements from family members and observing the family home stocked with food, the DHS ultimately closed the file as it was unable to determine the abuse. After school officials and a parent of one of Jeanette's friends made additional reports to the DHS, Angela removed Jeanette from school and homeschooled her. Angela did not homeschool her other two children. Now in the home, Angela treated Jeanette differently from her other children. Jeanette was not allowed to speak with her siblings. Angela put locks on the kitchen cupboards and controlled Jeanette's eating. She provided Jeanette with less food than she gave to the rest of the family and sometimes forced Jeanette to forego meals. Angela also controlled what Jeanette drank. She removed hose spigots, turned off the water supply under the sinks, and installed locks on the bathroom. She forced Jeanette to obtain permission before drinking or using the restroom, and sometimes denied Jeanette water or the use of the bathroom. She also subjected Jeanette to physical punishment for disobedience, but did not similarly target her other children. Angela herself would force Jeanette to eat really spicy peppers or stand or kneel in a corner for long periods of time, sometimes while holding heavy objects, causing bruising and cuts and sometimes removing her teeth. Angela also would repeatedly abuse Jeanette's bare back, bottom and legs with belts and sticks, causing lacerations that would bleed. Wow, you silly cow. Angela often isolated Jeanette in a single bedroom to commit the violent acts, and turned on the vacuum or turned up the volume on the television to prevent others from overhearing. That's insane. Think about that. She thought about the abuse so meticulously in order to drown out Jeanette's screams, her pain. She turned up the vacuum, or she made more noise in the room, the television, so loud that it would drown out Jeanette's noise. Wow. After the most violent attacks, she put iodine on Jeanette's wounds and attempted to bandage the injuries herself, declining to seek professional medical or dental care for Jeanette. Richard himself did not intervene or pursue treatment for Jeanette's injuries. Now, during the summer of 2009, after Richard suffered a heart attack, the family moved from their house on Robin Avenue to a home on Howard Avenue. Angela's abuse, torture, and starvation of Jeanette intensified. Jeanette herself lost weight and sustained serious physical injuries, some of which became infected. In early December, Jeanette suffered a significant mark on her head, after which she appeared confused and had difficulty walking or standing. Now on December the 9th, 2009, Jeanette fell asleep on the floor and became unresponsive. Angela and Richard placed Jeanette in the bathtub and called Richard's mother, who told them to call 911. Emergency responders arrived and rushed Jeanette to the hospital, where she was pronounced dead. And given the severity of Jeanette's prolonged starvation, dehydration, physical injuries, and localized infections, authorities were unable to pinpoint a single cause of death. In other words, she died 5 times by 5 different reasons, if you think about it. The cause of death instead was listed as multifactorial abuse and neglect. Angela and Richard accompanied investigators to the sheriff's office for questioning. Before leaving the hospital, both of them privately discussed assigning the blame to Richard. This is because there was the possibility that authorities might impose a lighter sentence on him as the result of his heart condition. What? At the sheriff's office, detectives separated the couple, read them their Miranda rights, and interviewed them. Richard initially told authorities that he had abused Jeanette, but later admitted that he had not been truthful and had agreed to take the blame. Angela also initially assigned blame to Richard, but then later made self-incriminating statements. Detectives executed search warrants for both of the homes on Howard Avenue and Robin Avenue. This is where police discovered blood and other DNA evidence and observed an apparent attempt to sanitize some of that evidence. Also recovered from a garbage bin at the Howard Avenue were several blood-stained items, including sticks, belts, clothing, bedding, and a piece of cardboard on which Angela forced Jeanette to sleep. Investigators found evidence of torture, including a blood-soaked ruler with a metal edge. They also found a blood-soaked stick, a blood-soaked cardboard, which they later learned the girl was forced to sleep on to avoid ruining the carpeting. Jeanette's bedroom was described as a torture room, with blood and flesh splattered to the floor and the ceiling. Meanwhile, 2 younger children were taken into protective custody. So, on December 16, 2009, Jeanette and Richard were charged with aggravated murder. In 2011, Angela pled guilty to aggravated murder. Now, during her sentencing, they introduced a lot of evidence. Here's a quick timeline of that. You see, in 1995, Jeanette, who was aged 1, was taken into protective custody in California due to abuse. In 2001, she was reunited with her mother and toddler sister. In 2002, her mother married Richard. In 2005, the family moved to Oregon, and this is when Jeanette enrolled in public school. Classmates and school personnel suspected abuse talked with Jeanette, who confirmed the abuse. School personnel talked with Angela, who denied abuse and referred to her daughter as a chronic liar. A friend's mother called Child Protective Services between 2005 and Jeanette's death. At least 6 calls were made to the CPS about a girl being starved and abused by her mother. In fact, for 3 years, people in Jeanette's life tried to get child welfare involved to no avail. Her step-grandmother, a concerned parent of a friend, and educators all called the DHS for help because she was bruised, constantly hungry, and said she had been abused at home. Jeanette, who was a quiet, dark-haired girl who sought refuge in books at her school's library, tried unsuccessfully to hide her injuries during her time in school. But many days when she got into her clothes for gym class, friends saw bruises on her abdomen and legs, which she said came from falling. In fact, one classmate, Amber Davis, wouldn't accept Jeanette's explanations about her injuries and pressed her for the truth. One of Jeanette's closest friends during her time in middle school told her parents and school officials about Jeanette's bruises in 2007. They contacted the Child Welfare Office in Eugene. The middle school, who did not want to be identified, said they also contacted the child services to get help for Jeanette. Jeanette's grandmother saw her only occasionally. She says she twice called child welfare authorities anonymously to report abuse. Now, at Jeanette's funeral, grieving friends, their parents, teachers, and family members said they trusted that social workers would rescue Jeanette, but they never did. In fact, court records show that a child protective service worker found scars on the younger sister of Jeanette the night the teenager died at the hands of her mother. The documents paint a more complete picture of the abuse in the household of Angela and Richard. They both pled guilty in the torture of Jeanette. The court documents describe the 12-year-old sister, who was also abused, as insisting she was scratched by a cat and telling a caseworker she feared her mother would be taken away from the family. Prosecutors, though suspicious, say they were never able to bring charges involving the 12-year-old. So to conclude, Angela was sentenced to death after she pled guilty. Richard is currently serving a life sentence in prison after he pled guilty to murder by abuse and saying he failed to protect his stepdaughter. And going back to the case of the 12-year-old sister, Nicole Brown was the caseworker and her statement was read out in court. You see, in 2009, she said Jeanette's sister became very nervous and started shaking when Brown asked her to inspect her arms and legs. She then noted several scars up and down her arms and legs. They were very narrow and faint in nature, but very numerous. She immediately told me they were from being scratched by a cat. I asked her how a cat had scratched her lower back. She was unable to tell me and continued shaking. In other words, the 12-year-old was covering for her mother. Also in this case, prosecutor Eric Hasselman told the newspapers that investigators had a doctor examine the 12-year-old, but she continued to say that it was a cat and not her mother. The girl later testified at her mother's trial that her mother forced her on several occasions to gather the family's dog feces from the backyard, and she did this because Angela wanted to get the feces and smear them on Jeanette's face. This statement also included more caseworkers who also spoke to Jeanette and also mentioned the abuse her other brothers were receiving. All these children in the end were taken into state protective custody. What kind of sick story was this? Angela and Richard, you should be ashamed. Wankers. Comment, tell me what you think.